landed lightly on the ground. Dawn was just turning the dark world into monochrome when she slipped across the inn's yard. The Duchess watched her from the inn sign too. Her father had been a great loyalist, at least up to the death of her mother. The sign hadn't been repainted this year, and a random bird dropping had given the Duchess a squint. Polly checked that the recruiting sergeant's cart was still in front of the bar, its bright banners now drab and heavy with last night's rain. By the look of that big fat sergeant, it would be hours before it was on the road again. She had plenty of time. He looked like a slow breakfaster. She let herself out of the door in the back wall and headed uphill. At the top, she turned back and looked at the waking town. Smoke was rising from a few chimneys, but since Polly was always the first to wake and had to yell the maids out of their beds, the inn was still sleeping. She knew that the widow Clambers had stayed overnight. It had been raining too hard for her to go home, according to Polly's father, and personally she hoped for his sake that she'd stay every night. The town had no shortage of widows, and Eva Clambers was a warm-hearted lady who baked like a champion. His wife's long illness and Paul's long absence had taken a lot out of her father. Polly was glad some of it was being put back. The old ladies who spent their days glowering from their windows might spy and peeve and mumble, but they had been doing that for too long. No one listened anymore. She raised her gaze. Smoke and steam was already rising from the laundry of the girls' working school. It hung over one end of the town like a threat, big and grey with tall, thin windows. It was always silent. When she was small, she'd been told that that was where the bad girls went. The nature of badness was not explained, and at the age of 5, Polly had received a vague idea that it consisted of not going to bed when you were told. At the age of 8, she'd learned it was where you were lucky not to go for buying your brother a paint box. She turned her back and set off between the trees, which were full of birdsong. Forget you were ever Polly. Think young male, that was the thing. Fart loudly, and with self-satisfaction at a job well done. Move like a puppet that had had a couple of random strings cut. Never hug anyone, and, if you meet a friend, punch them. A few years working in the bar had provided plenty of observational material. No problem about not swinging her hips, at least. Nature had been pretty sparing there, too. And then there was the young male walk to master. At least women swung only their hips. Young men swung everything, from the shoulders down. You have to try to occupy a lot of space, she thought. It makes you look bigger, like a tomcat fluffing his tail. She'd seen it a lot in the inn. The boys tried to walk big in self-defense against all those other big boys out there. I'm bad, I'm fierce, I'm cool. I'd like a pint of shandy and my man wants me home by 9. Let's see, now. Arms out from the body as though holding a couple of bags of flour, check. Shoulders swaying as though she was elbowing her way through a crowd, check. Hands slightly bunched and making rhythmical circling motions as though turning 2 independent handles attached to the waist, check. Legs moving forward loosely and ape-like, check. It worked fine for a few yards until she got something wrong and the resultant muscular confusion somersaulted her into a holly bush. After that, she gave up. The thunderstorm came back as she hurried along the trail. Sometimes one would hang around the mountains for days, but at least up here the path wasn't a river of mud, and the trees still had enough leaves to give her some protection. There was no time to wait out the weather anyway. She had a long way to go. The recruiting party would cross at the ferry, but Polly was known to all the ferrymen by sight, and the guard would want to see her permit to travel, which Oliver Perks certainly didn't have. So that meant a long diversion all the way to the troll bridge at Tubes. To the trolls, all humans looked alike, and any piece of paper would do as a permit, since they didn't read. Then she could walk down through the pine forest to Ploon. The cart would have to stop there for the night, but the place was one of those nowhere villages that existed only in order to avoid the embarrassment of having large empty spaces on the map. No one knew her in Ploon. No one ever went there. It was a dump. It was, in fact, just the place she needed. The recruiting party would stop there, and she could enlist. She was pretty certain the big fat sergeant and his greasy little corporal wouldn't notice a girl who'd served him last night. She was not, as they said, conventionally beautiful. The corporal had tried to pinch her bottom, but probably out of habit.